me and the boys sieging down a castle listening to this. Starts to twerk, historically. Slowly lifts my skirt to reveal my ankles as I sing this to my partner. London in 1347, hey, a rat. China in 2020, hey, a bat. That beat dropped harder than the axe on Anne Boleyn's head. I feel like this would be played in the credits when the internet ends. Bardcore exploded in popularity last year, and it's still a lucrative business with new Bardcore mixes pulling in hundreds of thousands of views. I mean, who wouldn't want to recreate their own bedroom nightclub to a loot cover of well-armed peasants? Okay, maybe that's just me. It could easily be assumed that Bardcore would only be popular with the people who got excited about the new translation of Beowulf, but instead it became a viral sensation, traversing the internet from YouTube to TikTok. So, what's up with Bardcore? Bardcore has been around for years, but it took an algorithm fluke for it to bless everyone's lives. I would place its predecessors as medieval tavern mixes used to set the tone during D&D campaigns, or listened to by nerds doing their Old English translations. These kinds of playlists draw on the archetypal medievalisms to create an auditory fantasy backdrop of taverns and adventures perfect for escaping into a different world while writing or gaming or well just, yeah. Combine that with modern popular music and it turns out we have the best music genre we didn't know we wanted. It was back in April 2020 when Bardcore got its big break. As what seemed to be a joke at the time, the channel Cornelius Link released its first Bardcore cover, a medieval version of the coffin dance meme, which in retrospect was a pretty good indicator of what was to come. Within a month or two, pretty much everyone had been gifted at least one Bardcore in their feed. Not wanting to miss out on the clear hunger for more Bardcore, a whole host of channels were born to supply the demand. Of course, you can listen to your classic covers of Pumped Up Kicks, Hips Don't Lie, and even the Macarena. But there are also those who are, shall we say, refining the genre. Algol the Bard plays classic rock songs with real medieval instruments. There are old, Middle English and even Latin translations over your usual deep lute bass. But by far the superior of the bards is Hildegard von Blingen, who uses original vocals and period-accurate instruments for her beautiful songs and who may actually be the immortal Hildegard von Bingen. You never know. And as someone who regularly listens to medieval music on YouTube to get into the medieval mindset, as someone who has a strictly academic interest in the history of music, I wondered how much Bardcore matches up to the real medieval music, and most importantly, what the popularity of Bardcore reveals about how we might think about the past in relation to the present day. The first big question is, when exactly are we talking in the medieval period? The European Middle Ages is conventionally defined as taking place roughly between the fall of the Roman Empire and the introduction of the printing press. That was a long time with a lot of change. Whole instruments and styles of music were invented, faded away or refined over that period. We need to narrow this down. Most Bardcore thumbnails make use of imagery from the Pale Tapestry. The tapestry was made by Norman ladies to document the Battle of Hastings, when William the Conqueror took the English crown in 1066. Jumping off that, let's say Bardcore takes influence from the 11th century. As they're usually adapted from songs in English and or written in bastardised Old or Middle English, let's say we're talking about music from the British Isles and neighbouring countries. For many 11th century people, the main time they would have heard music might have been in the church. The easiest instrument for any church to access is the human voice, which can be provided by the local devout population. Most music from 11th century manuscripts is religious music. Gregorian chant was the most prolific, and it basically consists of a group singing Latin Bible verses with the variation coming from the different notes rather than the rhythm. Around this time, religious figures formed a way to record music so this type of musical worship could be recreated. The notation is pretty basic, with dots representing differences in pitch in comparison to a consistent middle line, but still it gives us something to help us hear the sounds of the past. However, Gregorian chant is missing some of the key iconic elements of Bardcore. This is because the musical techniques that are the core of modern music had not been developed yet. Mapping modern music onto 11th century music just wouldn't sound right. There is little music with instruments recorded from this time, which is sort of an essential aspect of Bardcore. We have to jump forwards to the 14th and 15th centuries for us to start to hear the musical changes that sound more natural to our modern ears. Without getting too technical, 11th century religious music tended to use the perfect fourth and the perfect fifth. They thought this sounded most pure and holy, but over the next few hundred years there came the rise of thirds. These come in the major third and the minor third, and previous musicians shied away from them because of the ambiguity. But later on they were embraced because of the variation they bring to music. Now thirds are the base of our modern music. Musical notation also became more sophisticated by the 15th century, noting rhythm as well as pitch. It's for this reason that I feel confident to date Bardcore's primary influence to the later medieval period, despite the fact that they generally use imagery from earlier in the period. The semi-Middle English in some Bardcore covers and in the comment section is more similar to the language of the later medieval centuries. The later centuries also saw the rise of secular music and a greater variety of instruments. The variety of instruments from this time gives Bardcore more sounds to go on when adapting modern songs into this sound aesthetic. By the 14th and 15th centuries, there may have been more opportunities for people to hear music. With new instruments and an increase in secular music, there were more musicians ready to get out the guitar and strum away. Instruments were separated into those that were soft or bal and those that were loud or halt. Loud instruments were things like horns, percussion or pipes, and were played outdoors by people like heralds for dancing or on special days of the year. Soft instruments were for more intimate indoor occasions and were usually stringed instruments or quieter wind instruments. By these centuries they had recorders and flutes or guitar predecessors like the citole. The viol was the predecessor to the violin and the dulcimer was a stringed instrument that was hit with little hammers. And of course we cannot forget the reigning supreme of medieval instruments, the hurdy-gurdy. The hurdy-gurdy basically works by turning the wheel and controlling the pitch of the strings. The strings that play the tune are sometimes accompanied by the drone that plays a single note. The hurdy-gurdy was portable, relatively easy to make, and super loud, making it perfect for any kind of 14th century jig. A lot of Bardcorers admit that they aren't experts in medieval music, but they try to make something fun that conveys the gist of the period. But there are some that have a real interest in medieval music, and they make sure that comes across in their creations. Hildegard von Blingen records real instruments from the period. She adapts modern lyrics into semi-Middle English. It's pretty fun, especially if you know a bit about the language. We have records of real Middle English lays, many of which were about the theme of spring arriving, lovers meeting, or nature being beautiful. It's the sort of joyful stuff that modern lyrics might have too. One suggestion for why Bardcore works is that its music and words have this universal quality that transcends time. That said, although there is an effort to include real medieval instruments and sounds in Bardcore, you may have noticed that even the popular secular music of the 14th and 15th century still has some major differences to Bardcore. Most importantly, I am noticing a devastating lack of the hurdy-gurdy in Bardcore. Bardcore is fun and silly and maybe unironically good, but it's also not medieval. So why do people like Bardcore so much, and why did it become so popular when it did? The most popular explanation for Bardcore's rise is that it was pandemic blues and the general bleak times that made medievalism appealing. It's like a dark humour about the 14th century Black Death and how it's happening again. Or maybe it's the inequality and prejudice of the medieval period that you might be able to see remaining in the present day. I don't disagree with that explanation, but I think there is more to Bardcore than just, "Oh no, it's the plague again!" There is something very joyful and humorous about Bardcore that is full of escapism. The art and literature from the medieval period can get kind of silly, whether it's a saint bursting from the loins of a dragon or a serious discussion about how best to divide a farce into different pieces. To modernise, medieval illustrations can be pretty funny too. I mean, what was with all the killer bunnies and the giant snails? The juxtaposition between the old and the new makes it even more silly and fun, and the distance between the two styles of music unironically makes Bardcore a bop. So maybe it was COVID blues that made Bardcore a thing, or maybe it was just a music genre we didn't know we wanted and everyone happened to have the time to give the videos a listen. While we're talking about the modern use of neo-medieval music, we have to talk about the popularity of fantasy worlds. Fantasy often draws heavily on medievalisms, even if it's not strictly accurate to the real medieval period. There is sort of a parallel canon to medieval history, which is the historical fantasy canon. There are inns and quests and dungeons and mysterious creatures. You and your friends go adventuring with nothing but an oversized sword and a knapsack of dried meats and hard cheese, meeting strange characters along the way with the ultimate aim to defeat the powerful force cursing the land. One common element of historical fantasy worlds is a travelling bard, who is often a charming and charismatic character. Neo-medieval music is like the soundtrack to these imaginary worlds, forming a link between the Middle Ages and music that maybe other periods don't have. Bardcore remix of a modern song feels like it could conceivably be something played by the fan favourite travelling bard. But Bardcore's millions of viewers transcend the usual fantasy nerds. It got very popular among the weird, normal people too. And so Bardcore, and therefore neo-medieval music, is used in jokes about the world's past and present. When you show your ankles at the tavern. When your husband mysteriously dies and you inherit his wealth. When you're the only one in the village who survives the plague. It's all short videos about what the Middle Ages were like, apparently. And even if a lot of them are just wrong, a lot of people find them funny. There's also an element of using the music and aesthetic to make light of the current situation. Bardcore is a good example of seeing how people refer to the medieval period. That time period has been combined with fantasy and reality so much that now it's full of myths. It's been accepted as a terrible time to be alive, but it's also easy to see the funny side of it. A big part of Bardcore is making jokes about the medieval period and now, but there are also lots of people who love the idea of Bardcore and are using it to share their historical music knowledge. So Bardcore isn't historically accurate, and it doesn't claim to be. But if you're interested in Bardcore, you may have wandered into historical music YouTube. That must be the accurate stuff, especially when compared to Bardcore, right? Right? No, I'm sorry to say that the entire historical music scene has always had biases and modern influences like Bardcore. In 1907, Cecil Sharp released his influential work, English Folk Song, Some Conclusions. He collected examples of traditional folk songs and some might say he single-handedly kick-started the folk song revival. He helped to popularise folk music and country dance through his collection of 1,600 songs and his lectures advocating for the reawakening of English folk song. In the face of mass industrialisation and growing cities, many may have found comfort in the rural aesthetic or traditional country dance and music. We have him to thank that those traditions and music did not vaporise over the 20th century. However, Cecil Sharp considered English folk music to be natural, pure and simple, and a great instrument for sweetening and purifying our national life. To him, folk music was the essence of Englishness. Why bother teaching English children German music when that wasn't their nationality? The folk music of rival countries was unnecessary and potentially a threat. As for traditional music from around the globe, well, that wasn't worth collecting. The origin of neo-medieval music was about resurfacing a pure form of Englishness through music that was apparently being threatened by globalization. Anything that deviated from this ideal of Englishness was clearly incorrect. Even by the 1960s and 70s, neo-medieval musicians wanted to create a pure and authentic sound free from the influence of other countries. Obviously, the historical music scene has come a long way since Cecil Sharp's disregard of anything he considered non-English. But there is still a tension between authentic and non-authentic medieval music. One example is the modern instinct to write vocals accompanied by instruments, which has sparked debate about whether real medieval music used instruments as the main focus. The historical music authenticists promoted unaccompanied vocal music and anything else was clearly wrong. But even then, singers today are trained in a way that may have been different to the medieval performers. Nowadays the expectation is to belt and use vibrato, but back then the emphasis may have been on enunciation and standardization, which could have been more similar to speech. The truth is, all performed historical music is a recreation because the few remaining sources mean we can only make educated guesses about what real medieval music sounded like. One musicologist summarizes, "We have to create something, but along the way we inevitably start to invent, and what we invent reflects our own personal beliefs about the Middle Ages, our preferences for particular kinds of stories, our background and our tastes." And so, all neo-medieval music probably reflects the modern world more than the medieval period. Cecil Sharp revealed his anxieties about globalization and multiculturalism. Now neo-medieval music has a strong taint of popular historical fantasy that incorporates our collective canon for the genre. It's not medieval, and once we kick the nationalistic people out the door, it's a lot of fun. And this is where Bardcore is different. It's remixing modern songs into a medieval style. It doesn't care about accuracy at all. There are lots of talented people today who are doing an excellent job of recreating medieval music with real instruments and with an attention to the sources. But they'll always have a facade of the modern around their music because that's what happens when someone from the 20th century picks up a sitole. Bardcore dispels with that facade and gets down with the most fun parts of medieval music. So, love it or hate it, Bardcore is a new chapter in our journey through the historical music scene. It's given lots of people something silly to listen to and others a way to help them process what's happening today. It's also a way to see what people think about the medieval period and how they relate that to their own lives. Bardcore is a relinquishing of notions of accuracy while also a celebration of historical music.